Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So I'm redoing the 9/11 video. I've already explained it coming up in the video while I'm doing it, and why I am doing it, and more about the video. I have my old videos, 3 videos I put up. Each one was about 45 minutes long, but they're in a different format. I might at some point be able to republish those, but this is basically the same video condensed into a shorter, more concise. Again, I'm better at making videos than I was years ago. But in terms of this video, I'm not sure whether YouTube will get rid of it. I'm hearing that, which I'll explain in a bit, that YouTube is allowing people to post videos like this. I'm pretty sure that they won't monetize it. And if that's the case, if there's no ads, then please feel free to donate. If I got 100 people to donate like $1 and make $100 on the video, it'd be worth it for me to do. We'll see, what happens with this video. But anyways, without further ado, these are the images I've collected over the years. And so I did this all in most of it in voiceover format. And so the images might not always line up with what I'm talking about, but everything that I'm talking about here is backed up by these images. Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. One of my viewers was saying that they're allowing 9/11 videos back on YouTube because, there's kind of an anti-censorship thing going on right now because of the election, but also the establishment has effectively made such a mess of social media, and people don't believe anything anymore from either side. People are suspicious of all these things, that it probably doesn't matter. But either way, I had a reaction on September 11th. It was the day after the debate, and they falsely stated that Kamala Harris won the debate. And not because I'm a Trumper, because Trump sucks, and Trump is responsible for all this. Trump has hurt everyone in the truth community and the people around him who are these fake, QB truthers, all the things that I talk about on my regular channel. But in terms of the 9/11 stuff, for those of us who woke up to 9/11, it was a different time. It was like Wild West on the internet. You could do whatever you want. The big thing was copyright strikes, and people would lose their channels because of copyright strikes. But the community guideline stuff there was basically nothing there. I mean, I don't know anybody who got a community guideline strike, and people used to say like horrible things, right? And marginalized groups weren't protected, and there was no fact checking. There was no term of fake news, and people posted anything. And there were so many 9/11 videos, and many of them were really good. Some of them were shill. People who were disinformation agents were even present back then. But it was just all there to watch. And when you search for 9/11 videos, you find 9/11 videos. And when you opened up your YouTube feed, YouTube would recommend these things, right? And so so-called conspiracy theorist videos. And there's so many of them. And all that information has been lost. I mean, there was thousands upon thousands of videos, some of them great. And those of us who woke up back then, all the way back then, we've been through all these different things. And we've seen the way that this information gets disseminated change over time, right? And so there was the Pizzagate stuff. The Pizzagate way, people who woke up to Pizzagate. There was the people who woke up to the shootings, the various shooting incidences. The economic meltdown 2008. There are people, there's these various events where people realize that they're being lied to, and they woke up to these various things, and it affects you. You're a different kind of truther depending when you woke up and what event triggered your awakening. And whatever triggered your awakening is something that always bugs you. Like you never it's like a wound or something, right? And it's just there. And so I made my own 9/11 videos. And this person suggested that I repost those, but I would make those videos better now. I'm a better editor. I'm a better speaker. But I thought I would recreate this in a voiceover. And I'll find I think I deleted a lot of my 9/11 images, or the videos that exist somewhere on a hard drive. But if I can find the hard drive in the videos, it might exist on an old computer. I'll look there first. I'll just post the videos that I made, and I'll put this audio to it. Now, the audio and the video images won't match up, but all the stuff that I'm talking about, you can see in the images, and you can research for yourself. And they were breakthrough videos. I broke a few of the myths in the 9/11 truth community. Some things that, some of the big things, right? I debunked thermite, which was my, kind of my thing, was debunking thermite. I, settled on the mini nuke explanation, and also, with that, the thyroid issues that first responders and other people who are at ground zero suffered from. And so let me go through that, because there was a lot of people who reacted in a negative way, a lot of butthurt people who didn't have the ability to keep their minds open, who believed thermite was the gospel. And so the original story was, well, there's these architects and engineers that turned out to be basically a form of disinformation, because these guys were supposed to be architects and engineers. So these were people who were professionals in the field of building buildings, right? And they were the small group of people who were professionals in this area that admitted that the official story, so the official story is this, that these planes slammed into the, 2/3 up into the buildings, right? And the airplane fuel, which is kerosene, started a fire. And it burned so hot that the metal girders that held up the building melted and were compromised. And so they couldn't hold the weight of the floors above them. So they collapsed. And the weight of the collapsing of the floors made the other floors beneath them collapse. So that's what you saw. And it collapsed nicely within its own footprint, like controlled demolition does, right? They took down 3 buildings, because Building 7 also, which had no real fire. I mean, just had, and, there was video evidence of people saying Building 7 was going to be taken down, including the guy who was paid very handsomely, right? There was a guy who rented the Building 7, Larry Silverstein, and he made a fortune on it being taken down. And he said, they called me, and they said they were going to pull it, which meant that they were going to, take it down with controlled demolition, right? And so the problem with that is controlled demolition, it takes a long time for them to set the charges. It's done in a very precise way. And I'll get into that. Let me get back into that in a moment. So, but the entry point to 9/11 truth is this, that airplane fuel, jet fuel burns at a temperature ranging from 1800 to 1500 degrees at room temperature and pressure. However, the pressurized conditions inside the jet engine allows jet fuel to burn at a much higher temperature, close to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And the melting point of steel is between 2500 and 2750 degrees Fahrenheit. So the airplane fuel, and it wasn't the best conditions, right? It isn't being ventilated. It isn't being accelerated by, fans and things. And the jet fuel didn't go through the whole building. These buildings were massive. And so this fire that they allegedly had was not hot enough to melt the girders. It just wasn't. And everybody kind of realizes that. And the fact that the buildings collapsed so nicely within their own footprint, they look like buildings that had controlled demolition. And you start learning these terms and look into it. And so there was a few of these professionals, architects, engineers, that called bullshit on the original, the original official story. And so the one guy's name was Jones or Smith, Jones, I think. The guy who was sort of in charge of it, he came up with this idea of thermite. Okay, so thermite, here's the definition of thermite. Thermite is a pyrotechnic mixture of aluminum and metal oxide that produces intense heat when ignited. And it has many uses, including weld iron and steel. Thermite can be used in a foundry. Incendiary bombs. Thermite can be used in incendiary bombs. and produce carbon-free metals. And so there was some evidence, they said, that there was thermite, what thermite leaves behind there is a product. There was all this stuff about thermite. And the majority of people bought into this idea of thermite, including myself. I thought, well, this is, like I wasn't doing research back then. I was just watching videos. And so I went along with it. I didn't know how much disinformation was in the truth community. I knew the official story was bullshit. And this seems like a reasonable explanation. Again, these guys were supposed professionals. And they had to come up with how were the buildings taken down, right? And so when I looked into it years later, I had already thought a lot about this new idea of it being micro nukes, nuclear bombs, mini nukes. And there was a guy, Dmitry Halazov, who was a Russian arms dealer, kind of a scumbag guy who had nothing to lose. They gave an interview and said, was laughing at the whole thing and saying, those of us that know about this kind of stuff knows that these were taken down by mini nukes. And his theory, his explanation to me was the best. I think I have images throughout, you'll see, but his explanation was, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me get back to the thermite issue, right? So I started to look into controlled demolition. And I realized that controlled demolition produces a nightmare scenario, right? Like these buildings, there was the Seattle, there's some stadium in Seattle that was taken down, the Kingdom, right? And it was, the amount of dust and debris that it unleashed, this giant stadium. And then there was a company that was in charge of, they had brought down all the top buildings, right? And there was the tallest building that was ever taken down by controlled demolition. Okay, this is the one thing I want to show you. Most of this is just going to be me doing this audio here and then putting it to whether pictures or videos I have left, whatever I can find. And, I'm not going to spend much time on this. The audio is enough, the story, and you can, go look into it yourself if you want. But let's go to the video here. Okay, so when I searched for the tallest building to be taken down by controlled demolition. Now, when I made this video, I want to say close to 10 years ago, when I made my videos, 9 or 10 years ago, there was another building. This has happened since then, but this is the Mina Plaza Tower in Dubai, and it's 533 feet high. The World Trade Center Building 7 is 610 feet high, right? The original World Trade Center buildings were 1,360 feet tall, right? So you have this is the highest building ever taken down by controlled demolition, is 553 feet tall. So you understand the difference here, right? That's 1/3 of the large Twin Towers and 100 feet less, almost 100 feet less than Building 7. And so these other buildings, here's the building in Dubai, right? And so what you're going to see here, this is all toxic dust, right? Like that's all toxic dust that's going to spread across this whole area. Like they have to clear the streets, and this is all bad shit that's going to be there that people are going to breathe in. These huge clouds, right, of toxic material. There are people here in cities all around here that their buildings are going to be covered in this stuff, right? So what they've done is, this is the building in Manhattan, Park Avenue building.
In Manhattan, at 707 feet tall and 52 stories, 270 Park Avenue was the site of the largest voluntary demolition in the world, and it was no easy feat to dismantle. The first step was to shroud the entire building in scaffolding and netting to protect the area from debris and dust. A construction crane was erected to help remove larger pieces. but most of the initial work was done by hand to remove hazardous materials like asbestos and lead paint.
So you see that that's what has to happen, because otherwise people are going to be dying all around there. They're going to breathe in all this crap that's there, right? Especially there's asbestos in the original Twin Towers, because these are environmental hazards. Here's another tall building, certainly shorter than Building 7, but it's in a crowded area here.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And so this is toxic shit that's going all over these other buildings. It's going to spread throughout the city. And so what I discovered that wasn't talked about, like I watched so many 9/11 videos. I mean, I can't even tell you how many. And there's all these different theories, different things that were said. A lot of them had cross beliefs. They had beliefs that, about the thermite and things like this. But the first thing that I figured out was they have built these buildings, these skyscrapers, and there was no real way to take them down, right? This thing with the scaffolding, I mean, that's so expensive. The labor, the man hours, I mean, how many, you must have taken so much time to take down that building in Park Avenue. In fact, I can look that up. It took over a year, and, they were dealing with toxic materials. I couldn't get the cost, but it cost probably, I don't know, $1 billion or something crazy like that, right? They had to get they had to get trucks in there. They had to get hazardous waste disposal stuff. I mean, you have to bring it into these big cities with all the traffic and all these things, and then the nightmare it causes for the buildings around it, right? And so they build these skyscrapers with no plan what to do with them or how to take them down, right? And the ones that were taken down that are much smaller than Building 7 and were much, much smaller than the Twin Towers caused a life-threatening environmental hazard that would go on for years. These particles that were there, and some of them had, these buildings had toxic materials in them. And so they didn't have a way. They created these nightmare scenarios for the future. When you have concrete, cement, which is, a mixture of sand and some other things, right? And you mix actually sand to it. It's powderized like granite and these things. It's limestone, crushed gravel, and water and sand. And so, you buy this concrete mix, which is like limestone and this other stuff that's crushed. And then it's mixed with sand and water. And, it bonds into, it's like a giant glue, right? It's like basically glue. And any kind of material that bonds together, any glue, anything that has, it hardens into a surface, is got a shelf life. Like it's going to eventually crumble. In concrete, it's around 100 years. And so all these cities with their roads and their buildings, there's a period of time where the majority of these cities are just going to crumble. Things that bond the concrete together, right, has these little small bonds like atoms, like holding your body together, right? So these bonds that are between the elements in the concrete, they're at their maximum potential or their maximum bonding at, I think, 100 years. And, there's different forms of concrete, but that's, basically the idea here, right? 100 years. And then it starts to disintegrate. It goes to its maximum bonding, and then it disintegrates fairly quickly, and the bonds start to crumble. And you see this with concrete, right? It ceases to be this, this rock-like substance. And so to repair that is more expensive than it is to build it in the first place. And these cities fall apart. It's the whole city. When these cities are built within a 10 or 15-year period, or whatever, the majority of these roads are built in these buildings, there's going to be one thing falling apart after another. And so they've built these buildings that don't have, that long of a life, given their structure, given, how tall they are. And they're nightmares because of fires. They're nightmares because of, elevators and electricity going out. I mean, they shouldn't really be built, but they have been. And now they have to deal with it. And to take these buildings down is going to be an environmental hazard. And there'll be lawsuits. I mean, if to do it by controlled demolition, they couldn't have done the Twin Towers the way they did this 270 Park Avenue. That was not nearly as tall And of course, the bigger the building, the wider the debris spillage is going to be. And so these twin towers were nightmares. And whatever reason, they decided to take them down, right? They decided to get rid of them. And there's all this speculation about information that was housed in these buildings. Whatever it was, they decided to take them down. And this was the best way to blame it on terrorists, right? And so whatever environmental nightmare it caused would be blamed on them and not the people who took the building down, that you could sue them because the lawsuits would be in the billions of dollars. You'd have all these people, rich New Yorkers, many of them making lots and lots of money. So the lawsuit would be, about their projected earnings and the value of their lives, right? And we were talking about, all the people that have died or have had issues who were around that area. There's a health crisis, of course, all the first responders. And so this is what we're talking about here, right? It's a environmental nightmare and something that they didn't plan for. They didn't think their way through it before they start building these fucking buildings, right? So that's the environmental hazard thing. So I looked into the thermite, right? And so the idea was that if you put thermite on these girders, so at the base of every building, they have these giant steel girders. And that's what they need to get to collapse, right? That's what's holding the buildings up. And so the 9/11, if you look at the World Trade, the Twin Towers, crazy amounts of cement, crazy amounts of steel that's used. I mean, these things were massive. It's hard to really understand how big they were. Not just how tall they were, but how big they were. And how much materials went into them. And so this thermite idea was put out there, and everybody just sort of bought into it. And the idea was that these thermite was put on these girders, and then what they do is they put it at an angle. And so they slice these girders at a 45-degree angle, and the whole building slides slightly. They do it all at the same time, right? So the way they really do controlled demolition is that they use explosives to slice the girders, and makes the building slide slightly to the left or the right, and they cut them all at the same angle, and now the building is falling, right? It's no longer being supported, and so when it falls, the weight of the rest of the floors collapse on top of it, the weight of the whole building. And so it can't sustain any sort of, all of it collapses. There's a failure because the base of the building has been cut. So I found the company that had done the tallest buildings at the time. The company that had done all the top 5 or 10 or the tallest buildings. So this was one company that was the best at doing this, right? They are the experts, and they didn't ever use thermite. They had their own explosives, and they put these explosive charges on all the girders. And, they had a system. And I found that thermite had only been used twice in controlled demolition. And then they were for buildings that weren't built yet. They were ones that they started to build the steel frame. And for whatever reason, they ran out of money, or they decided to not build the rest of the building. And so they used thermite to take down the girders. And it's only happened twice. It's not something that you normally use. But in terms of these companies that do controlled demolition, they use, gunpowder, dynamite, nitroglycerin, C4, and RDX, some sort of explosive, another explosive material. I'm not sure what this one company used. I think it might have been C4, but I'm not sure. But either way, they don't use thermite. It's never used. They also encased the steel beams in concrete, and there was also cement girders used as well. And so those would not be, you couldn't take those down with thermite, right? There are these columns and things. Cement was used throughout the building. And so thermite burns through steel, but not through concrete. And so thermite just wasn't used. They don't use it. It was silly. It was just something they threw out there because they're saying, well, the official story's wrong. Let's throw in some more disinformation. And everybody believed it. The other thing that some people believe, is that it was some energy ray. And, that's just silly because whatever they have or don't have in terms of some sort of energy weapons, it just wasn't used there. And I'll explain, what to me is the most likely I mean, I can't say it's 100% on my part. I mean, I believe it 100%. Like when I heard it, it just clicked. And that is mini nukes or micro nukes, right? So there's this guy, Dmitry Halazov, and he was interviewed, and they did some imagery. And he was like a scumbag arms dealer from Russia. Kind of funny guy, but, not a guy with a lot of big moral code, not a reliable source, but what he said made complete sense. And so the first thing he said that is that the term ground zero has always referred to, I mean, before 9/11 of 2001, it always referred to a place where there had been a nuclear explosion. It was ground zero, right? If there had been a detonation of a atomic bomb or an explosion of a nuclear power plant, that was ground zero. And I don't think they even used that as much with a power plant, but more with a bomb. And so ground zero was always a place where a nuclear event would happen, and the official story, the official people called the site of the Twin Towers ground zero. They were basically saying this was a place where a nuclear event had happened, right? And you could say, well, they just hijacked that term or they brought it in. But what he explained as the how something like this works is they have these handheld mini nukes, and there's you can research this and find it. It was there, easily available. They have very small nukes that's used in, amongst other things, building destruction, and it's something that's used in Israel. So there's a show called The Last Resort. It's an excellent show. It is a one season show. It was supposed to be more, but they canceled it, and they sort of wrapped the show up quickly at the end. But it was a captain of a nuclear submarine. A nuclear submarine had to pick up some Navy SEALs that had been involved, and I think it might have been something somewhere in the Middle East. I think Lebanon, and they had, as the show developed, they had to pick up a mini nuke, right? And the American government targeted the submarine and was trying to kill the Marines that they picked up, the Navy SEALs, and then all the people on the submarine off the coast of Pakistan. And the captain decided, for self-preservation, to take the submarine to an island where he threatened to, in fact, shot off one missile. It was armed with nuclear missiles. And so he essentially went rogue. And again, the show was released in 2012, 11 years after the 9/11 event in September of 2012. And it has so many, interesting plot lines and storylines in it, but this idea of a mini nuke that was being used. And so the way it works, the way that Dmitry Halazov explained this, I think Halazov is spelled with a K. And I don't know if these videos still exist. I have some of the images that hopefully I'll be using in this video, some of the images that he said. But he says that they detonate one of these smaller nuclear bombs at the base of the building. And the explosion goes up through the building and, like this idea of a mushroom cloud, which we saw. I mean, you can see the mushroom cloud that exists afterwards. But again, these are very small handheld nuclear devices like the size of a thermos. And it vaporizes and powderizes the whole building, which is what it looked like when you see the Twin Towers come down. And it goes up through about 2/3 of the building and vaporizes everything and turns it into powder. And the rest of the building just collapses down from there. It has nothing preventing it from collapsing. And it's actually one of the better ways to bring down a building because there's nothing in its way to tilt it sideways. Sometimes these controlled demolitions, the charges don't go off in the right sequence, and the building collapses sideways and takes out other buildings, right? It's another, hazard to this idea of controlled demolition. And, that's what it looked like. And there was this molten steel, like weeks later, that was still melted at the base of the building. I mean, there was smoke coming out of the thing and all this stuff that had happened, right? And so I'm not remembering all the details, but there was a lot there that, this just made more sense. And so I looked into it. Like, I wanted to see if there's any way that I could prove it. Like, is there anything that would indicate this would be the more likely option? Certainly thermite was off the table. Controlled demolition was off the table for me because there was one company that had taken down buildings a third of the size of the Twin Towers, much smaller than even Building 7. And that company was a private company. Like, they didn't have governmental people. They didn't have military people that were trained in how to do this. And this was a massive project. And the charges that they had to place at the base of the building, I mean, it would have been extensive, right? They're taking down 2 major buildings and, 3 major buildings here that bigger than anything that had ever been taken down before in a very highly populated area. And they would have to do it with a private company, and they'd have to do it with people who would, you'd almost have to like kill those people, because they would be setting this thing up knowing it's going to be a controlled demolition, and they would be loose ends afterwards, right? And so it just didn't make any sense to me that they would do that, and it had never been done before. And so I looked into nuclear explosions, and one of the, the factors of nuclear, one of the things that comes out of a nuclear explosion is iodine-131. So people who are around these type of nuclear events, nuclear testing facilities, or what they tell you when there's a possibility of like nuclear war, they pass out iodine pills, pills with iodine in it, because your thyroid will absorb whatever iodine is available in the atmosphere. Your thyroid is searching for iodine. And so you need to have your iodine levels up so your thyroid isn't looking to bring new iodine in, because there'll be these particles of iodine-131 in the atmosphere at a nuclear explosion. And they have a shelf life, a half-life of 8 days. So they're radioactive for 8 days, and then they become inert. They're no longer a threat. And so when there's any of these nuclear events, there's always going to be a lot of thyroid cancer. And it takes so many years for it to develop, but it's there. And so they had very high levels of thyroid cancer. And so they had extraordinarily, a high level of cases of thyroid cancer in Chernobyl. And so I looked into 9/11. So now when I was making these videos, it was like 2013, 14, 15, something like this. So it'd been a number of years. So I looked into first responders, and there was a higher percentage case of thyroid cancer in the first responders than there in Chernobyl, right? So this is these first responders that were at ground zero, and so many of them had thyroid cancer. And asbestos doesn't cause thyroid cancer. The kind of debris that was there post the collapse of the buildings, airplane fuel doesn't cause thyroid cancer. Thermite doesn't cause thyroid cancer. It's a radioactive iodine. So I made my video, back in 2000 and whatever it was, right? And this is from the American Association of Cancer Research in an article from 2022. So basically 7 years after I made my videos. So there's even more cases here, it says. And so they say here, the World Trade Center exposure has one of the most significant associations with thyroid cancer, and an 81% increased risk among World Trade Center's responders. So they had an 81% higher risk to get thyroid cancer than normal people. And they go on to try to blame this on being tested and screened for cancer, which is like silly. Like, they're saying that when you're testing people for cancer, which we know with breast cancer, you're more likely to give it to these people. But right after, the 5-year period or whatever it was, where it takes thyroid cancer to develop, these first responders and people that were in and around the building had a much higher rate of getting thyroid cancer, right? So here's an article. It's called the 9/11 Cancer List. And what they say here is, first, this is what they say is causing it. They say the 53,531 people for cancer and other serious illnesses resulting from 9/11 toxic dust. So 53,000 people, almost 53,500 people, got serious illness from the toxic dust. That's what they're saying. and that included chemicals, pulverized glass, asbestos, concrete, and more. And they're saying somewhere in here that there is a 219% higher chance of getting cancer if you're a 9/11 person that was at ground zero. Again, ground zero. So here it says this. This is what I'd found before. This is from 2023 now. So they say there's a 219% increased risk of thyroid cancer. There's a 25% increased risk of prostate cancer, and there's a 41% increased risk of leukemia. So with both of those, right, so it's not lung cancer. You know what causes lung cancer is asbestos. So if asbestos was the issue, there'd be a much higher rate of lung cancer, and there isn't. And they're breathing all that toxic dust. There'd be much higher rates of lung cancer at 9/11 for the survivors of, the first responders and the people that were there. But it says there is some evidence that exposure to radiation from nuclear explosions may increase the risk of prostate cancer, but the evidence is inconsistent. And it says here, yes, radiation exposure can increase the risk of developing leukemia, especially in high doses. So there was high doses of radiation there that would explain it, right? Which would mean a nuclear bomb was exploded in the middle of fucking Manhattan. Like, think about the implications here, right? And so when I looked into it at the time, and, I just briefly looked into it now, and I just, again, don't want to spend a lot of time on a video that may or may not be, up in a couple of days or weeks or whatever, right? But in terms of the amounts of thyroid cancer at Fukushima and Chernobyl, it was children who suffered the worst effects of it. There was a much higher rate amongst adults, first responders, and people in that area by the Twin Towers than there was in Fukushima and Chernobyl. So think about that, right? Those were acknowledged nuclear events that happened with, these power plants exploding. And these first responders are getting higher cases of thyroid cancer, which is associated with radioactive iodine 131, which, is well documented. So to me, this was the smoking gun, right? Because the toxic dust that was there, none of those things would explain the higher rates of thyroid cancer. In fact, the toxic dust, you would think there would be higher rates of lung cancer. And the rate of lung cancer was lower than the rate of leukemia, the rate of thyroid cancer, and the rate of prostate cancer, right? And, this was toxic dust because these, the building was pulverized. And all these people who breathed in that dust, right? I mean, it's a disaster on lots of levels. So it says here, thyroid cancer is the most common kinds of cancers linked to exposure to ground zero after 9/11. Survivors, first responders, and those near the area of the attack have a 219 higher chance of developing thyroid cancer. And so thyroid cancer is mentioned 13 times in this article. So for me, it's a smoking gun. You can believe whatever you want. People have whatever they believe in terms of this. But given what I've found out about, and you can, people can look into this themselves, that thermite is not used in controlled demolition, and that there isn't really any other explanation. Controlled demolition done the normal way would be too difficult and would never have been done on something this size, right? And, I mean, it took a year to take that down with that one building using scaffolding. And these things have to be planned out. I mean, there's an art form to it because the building wants to fall over, right? It's like anything that you put, like a Jenga block. If you put the Jenga block up vertically, it wants to tip over, right? It doesn't want to fall straight down. It wants to fall over on other buildings. And so a nuclear bomb would ensure that doesn't happen. And it would get rid of whatever evidence there is there. And there's, they could just blame it on everybody who suffers. The first responders, they would be blaming it on the terrorists and not the people who are taking down the building. So if you look it up, again, this is mainstream information. They're handheld nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, small enough that they can be carried in suitcases, things like this, and they can take down buildings, right, depending where they're located, and it's been done and used before. and it's made it into fictional movies and TV shows, and I've seen it in a number of these like spy movies and things, right? And so it exists. So if they had nuclear weapons that could take down the Twin Towers, and they call the place where the explosion went off Ground Zero, like it's the most famous Ground Zero, right? Never forget Ground Zero. And there is a high rate of thyroid cancer, which is associated with nuclear activity, nuclear explosions. Then there's overwhelming evidence for something that is, to me, the most logical explanation. So I made 3 videos about this, and I can't remember the order of the videos, but I remember in the 3rd video I talked about the association with Israel, the 5 dancing Israelis, and there's association between Israel and these handheld nuclear devices, smaller nukes and things. And so I'm not going to revisit that. I don't remember as much about that as I do about these other things. But if this is true, right, if there is nuclear weapons used in the explosion of the buildings, right, the Twin Towers, and a foreign government was involved in exploding a nuclear device in the middle of New York fucking city, right, to perpetrate a hoax that would lead to, I think, 5 wars, killing over 1 million Rockies, killing hundreds of thousands of people in Libya and Afghanistan, and all the money that was spent, all the lives that were lost, all the hell that was exhibited. Of course, they used depleted uranium in Fallujah, and so we know America will use nuclear devices, but if they use them on their own people, and a foreign government was involved, like that's so fucked, right? I mean, and that's what I believe has happened. Like to me, it's, I'm 100% on it. It's maybe not as factual as it could be, but we're limited in what we can gather, and it's the most reasonable explanation. And so there's been a lot of great videos about 9/11, but to me this is the most important one because of the implications of the possibility of nuclear devices being used by a government on its own people and then perpetrating a hoax that is used to do so much damage and do so much, cause so much pain and suffering and death globally, and then use it to create this victim consciousness as an excuse to go and inflict pain and suffering on other people's. It's just like as evil as it gets, right? It's pure frickin' evil. And so, anyways, this thing always bugs me a little bit every 9/11, every anniversary of this event, because, they throw it in your face. I was watching, I think it was First Take, and the host said, since we're in New York, I want to remind everyone it's 9/11, never forget, right? We'll never forget the bullshit you were told, right? And so for those of us who, were awoken by this event, it's so much more important than Pizzagate or any of these other things, and Trump and the QB stuff and all these things. It was the beginning of what now is the truth community. And that's the biggest lie that's been told. Like if this is what I'm saying here is true, if there's a nuclear bomb exploded in New York City, or, it was just the official story is complete bullshit, and the event was perpetrated by the American government, rogue members of the American government, and all the media and all these people went along with it and are complicit, then the whole system is so bad and so damaged, especially years later. Anyways, so like I said, I just wanted to put this out there. We'll see if the video is allowed to stay up. YouTube is loosening up these rules a little bit. I don't know if the video will remain monetized. If it isn't, people can donate just to participate in the support for this kind of material. I'm not sure that they'll allow this to be monetized or they'll allow it to stay up, but you'll see, one way or another. I'm putting this up on Friday, September 13th. And, and I'm going to be talking about Laura Loomer and Marjorie Taylor Greene on my next video on my normal channel, and this all ties into that as well because of, you'll see the relationship, and I'll mention this video in that video. But anyways, I did my best to recreate this here, and only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting for the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.